Tonight, fighting back, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar under attack for anti-Semitic tweets, not staying quiet.
I mean, I just want to point out that the tweet was horrible.
It was all about anti-Semitism. Representative Omar was speaking anti-Semitic tropes for the last 2 months.
Now, you might remember that in 2019, mainstream media declared that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar made an anti-Semitic statement. What did she say that was so offensive? Omar pointed out that campaign donations from organizations like AIPAC are connected to our government's unending support of Israel. Shocking. To that end, we just got a stunning new report from Sludge that explains how our elected officials have received almost $13 million in donations from AIPAC in the first 6 months of this year. And lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are getting that money. We'll tell you all about that report momentarily, who's getting the most. But Cenk, what are your thoughts here when you hear that number? $13 million in 6 months.
Yeah, so look, all lobbyists buy our politicians. And the thing that drives me crazy is when mainstream media in mass pretends that they don't. They're buying them. Big Pharma buys over 90% of our politicians. Big oil buys, purchases the prostitutes that call themselves congresspeople. Okay, every lobby buys our politicians. It's not to slightly influence them. It's not because of the general welfare. It's not because of charity. It's because they want to control them to do what the lobbyists and the special interests want. It's not specific to Israel, but it also applies to Israel, okay? So what I'm curious about, and what we asked you on TYT.com is, do you think it makes sense that the media almost never talks about AIPAC being the top donor to Congress in 2024? A, yes, it helps combat anti-Semitism. B, no, they should report the facts. Is that 0% at combating anti-Semitism? But by the way, mainstream media, that would be nearly 100% saying combat anti-Semitism, and no, we should not report those particular facts. So there's this constant and massive disconnect between what the American people want and what their politicians and their media gives them. Okay, we've got more details. Hear the whole story, and then Jules and I will come back in and weigh in on it.
Well, let's start with the congressional leadership in the House of Representatives. And keep in mind that all of these numbers are for the first half of this year. The top recipient of AIPAC's donations was House Speaker Mike Johnson, who received $625,000 given to a pair of his fundraising committees. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries received $250,000 from AIPAC's PAC to his joint fundraising committee in February. Senators on both sides of the aisle are getting hefty contributions as well. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, received $360,000, and Senator Mark Warner, vice chair of the Select Committee on Intelligence, received $351,000. The same goes for the House, where both Democrats and Republicans are taking donations. Representative Wesley Bell received $468,000 through June from the group's PAC, according to Sludge's tally. Outspoken Israel supporter Representative Richie Torres received over $391,000 from AIPAC's PAC so far this cycle. Representative Randy Fine, someone we've talked about a lot on this show, received close to $311,000 through the first half of this year. And we've talked about Randy Fine often because some of the things he has said just recently, that Gazans can starve away, as we just talked about in the last block. He called Ilhan Omar a Muslim terrorist and said that Gaza should be nuked. This corruption goes far beyond Randy Fine, though. AIPAC's PAC skyrocketed to become by far the largest PAC contributor in the 2023 to 24 cycle, giving more than $55.2 million to federal candidates. Its PAC's total spending in the first half of 2025 represents an increase of more than 80% compared with the first 6 months of 2023. Nearly 2/3 of Congress have accepted AIPAC money, ensuring a united bipartisan front in support of Israel. So what does AIPAC want in return for those donations? This year, AIPAC lobbied on behalf of a bill called the United States-Israel Defense Partnership Act of 2025. The bill's highlights include 150 million for a new joint technology program between the United States and Israel to counter drone weapons. It also entails extending the so-called Future of Warfare program for another 5 years at 50 million annually to develop emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. Another provision would direct money toward development of anti-tunneling technology, the sensors and weapons sometimes referred to as Israel's underground Iron Dome. That bill hasn't gone anywhere in Congress yet. However, most of those key provisions that AIPAC supported in a policy brief this year and lobbied for throughout the spring are now included in both the House and Senate draft versions of the NDAA. AIPAC has spent nearly $1 million lobbying on the defense bill, among other legislative priorities, in the first quarter of 2025. There's a lot here, but Cenk, what do you make of this?
Yeah, so they'll get everything they want. They just got $500 million in the middle of a genocide, and it wasn't close. It was 422 to 6. And so look, let's break down a couple of things here. First, Ilhan Omar, we showed you those clips in the beginning because she was censured and everyone was outraged because she said, referring to the Israeli lobby, it's all about the Benjamins. It's a play on a song, wow, shocking, and Benjamin Netanyahu, and the fact that special interests give money to politicians. Where's the offensive part? Oh no, there's a trope that Jews spend money to buy people. Everybody spends money. What is, but big pharma, big sugar, everybody, is it all about the Benjamins? It's obviously all about the Benjamins. And it's not like some deeply, deeply offensive thing. Okay, if you say no, Cenk, that is monumentally offensive. That's why they had to censure her. Randy Fine said we should nuke Gaza, and then he said later we should starve them to death. Not censured. So now I'm told by mainstream media that no, that disparate treatment, it's your eyes are lying to you, your ears are lying to you. Joe Biden is young, Donald Trump's not a nut job, and all about the Benjamins is deeply offensive. And saying we should murder everybody in Gaza, not at all offensive, and has nothing to do with the Israeli lobby. Oh, outrageous! How dare you? 100% of the Republican leaders in Congress their top donor is AIPAC of 100% of the Republican leaders. The top donor for Democratic leaders, 75% of Democratic leaders is AIPAC. Top donor for career-wise for Joe Biden was AIPAC. Top donor for Donald Trump is the Adelson family, also in favor of Israel. Let me give you more stats here, but I'm being very offensive. Murdering Palestinians, no big deal, but actually pointing out verifiable facts, deeply offensive. Guys, it's not offensive. It's mainstream media trying to trick you into never criticizing Israel. Okay, why they do that is an entirely different story. That one is an unbelievable. Like, I know it's groupthink. Where it arises, how it arises, I don't know, and that's an amazing phenomenon. Because the politicians are obvious. That's easy. They're crooks and they're prostitutes. In fact, let me read you about them. This is from Sludge again. Sludge is a fantastic news outlet covering money and politics. You should check them out. Among House Republican leaders, graphic 11 here. Among House Republican leaders, the top-ranking trio of Speaker Mike Johnson, Majority Leader Steve Scalise, and Majority Whip Tom Emmer received a combined $1.6 million from AIPAC last cycle. On the House Democratic side, the top trio received nearly $2 million combined from the PAC. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries received closer to $942,000, with Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar given $621,000, and Whip Catherine Clark given $404,000 in the last cycle. But mainstream media tells you, no, these politicians are so noble and honorable, they're not at all affected by those millions of dollars. And that's just this cycle. And then Jordan read you what they've done since the election. And then there's all of the spending, hundreds of millions of dollars in spending through all the other cycles. But the lunatics, the conspiracy theorists on cable news and at the New York Times and Washington Post tell you, no, that has no influence on the politicians. And saying it does is offensive. Saying we should murder all the Palestinians, not offensive. Pointing out how our politics works, deeply offensive. Jules.
I think one of the craziest things that we see happening in mainstream media is the refusal to acknowledge the fact that since Citizens United, we have had fully open, legalized corrupt bribery in the United States. And it follows super clearly, right? AIPAC is one of the politicians' biggest donors. They pretty universally support Israel. They are paid to do so. It may line up with their personal beliefs, but when you see how much money is being funneled into American politics, essentially dark money, it's not a surprise. If somebody gives you $250,000 to have an opinion just on the side, that opinion is going to support the person who gave you that money. I don't think that's a complicated thing to understand, and it's super weird. I agree with you, Cenk. Emphatically, it's super weird that the mainstream media is blind to this fact that we have had this change in the way our politics runs really dramatically. We know that money wins elections. We know that money sways political influence and political access. And pretending that that's not the case, or that that's the case on a very marginal level that maybe only affects the most corrupt politicians, is nonsense. We are watching it happen every day. We see it, like you're saying, not just in regards to Israel. We see it in regards to big pharma. We see it like over the healthcare industry in general. So many of the things that we struggle with as Americans is exactly the result, is that somebody richer who is able to exploit us by funneling a very small fraction of the money they've already exploited out of us back into politics, leads to this kind of really direct relationship between like corruption and bribery and our political system. It's almost, it's like the craziest thing that I've ever seen in my lifetime, because it's happened during my lifetime. This dramatic shift where, oh yeah, pretty much across the board, if you give a candidate enough money, if you give an issue enough money, it will succeed in American politics. And the last thing I'll say on this is that I think this reflects the point I was making in the last hour about France recognizing Palestine. They're not being funded by AIPAC. It's almost that simple, is when you don't have this kind of direct financial relationship with your political world, the result is different. And again, crazy that we don't talk about this as the number one problem with politics and treat it like, yeah, this is normal, this is fine, and actually it's not affecting anybody at all.
Could I just point out here, so Wesley Bell, people may be familiar with him. He's representing St. Louis. He was recruited to run by the pro-Israel lobby in St. Louis to challenge Cori Bush. Now, you might not like Cori Bush, but Cori Bush was putting herself out there in a way that very few, if any, members of Congress were. You might recall she did a sit-in on the Capitol steps to call for an eviction moratorium during COVID to look out for people who are struggling to pay rent. Have you seen Wesley Bell stick his neck out for anybody? And I think within that, there's an element of selling your soul. And I think generally you get a lot of soulless people in Congress, but this is unique in that he took money from an interest group and continues to take hefty amounts of money to preserve his seat at a time where they are representing and supporting and advocating for a country that is actively engaged in committing a genocide. There is some serious soul searching that everybody who takes this money needs to do, but him specifically, because he was recruited by them to oust somebody who was a tireless fighter against this type of corruption and for Palestinians. That's who he was recruited specifically to out. She fought for working people, she fought for the marginalized, she fought for Palestinians, and this guy was happy to accept hefty campaign contributions to try to kneecap her. And might I add, the attack ads that groups like Democratic Majority for Israel, which is a PAC associated with AIPAC, some of the most racist things I've ever seen. We covered it on this show. They digitally manipulated the image to prolong her facial features to make her look like a monkey. This is a black woman they're doing this to. That's who he is working with. That's who he is taking money from. That's who they all are taking money from. Not only are they vile in that regard, but they are actively defending and trying to deflect from an ongoing genocide.
Yeah, and I'm going to say two last things here. So one is I don't want people thinking this idea that folks put out that Jules briefly mentioned, they happen to agree. Are there some people who happen to agree with Israel already in Congress? Of course there are, right? Even at this late stage of the genocide. So Randy Fine's obviously perfectly fine with it, Brian Mast and others, right? But that's not really how it works. Jordan is right. They go and find the person who agrees with them. It's a country of 330 million people, of course you can. And the best example is actually Chantal Brown in Ohio. So she was running against Nina Turner. Nina Turner had a gigantic lead in that race in Cleveland. And then, and there was 11 people against her, and they were all polling at 1 or 2%, like nowhere. Chantal Brown on her website put out a statement for no reason, just by itself on a page, about how much she agrees with Israel and there would be no distance between her position and Israel's position. And all of a sudden, $6 million showed up. And all of a sudden, Nina Turner's lead disappeared. I forget if it was 4 or 6, but it was a giant number. So in a country with 330 million people, take another country or take anything else, right? Take the sugar lobby or whatever it is. If you said, okay, if you're in favor of the sugar lobby, can you find 435 people who are? I guess, right? Raise your hand. Okay, you get 4 million, you get 4 million, you get 4 million. Guess what would happen? The entire Congress would just coincidentally be people who happen to agree with the sugar lobby or with the government of Turkey or the government of Sweden, right? Because that's how corruption works. And finally, their last excuse, and this is an excuse, guys, is, oh no, that's why we mentioned in the beginning. Oh, it's an anti-Semitic stereotype that Jews control the governments, etc. But we're not talking about Jews. Stop saying that. That's actually driving anti-Semitism. The top rabbi in the country said Israel's got to stop. The top Holocaust expert in the country, a guy who was in the IDF, is a Zionist Jewish American, says Israel's got to stop. It's a genocide. Bernie Sanders says they have to stop. It isn't about religion. It's about a government hiding behind it. They say, well, that's a stereotype. But brother, okay, I'm going to give an absurd example. Okay, there are no stereotypes of Turks as far as I know in America, because there aren't that many of us. So we didn't get to have a stereotype yet, okay? But let's say that it was based on me. They say, oh yeah, all Turks are overweight. And then I show up to Congress in a crop top, right? With my giant gut hanging out. And they go, well, you're overweight. How dare you? That's an anti-Turkish stereotype. But brother, then don't show up in a crop top, okay? So if AIPAC doesn't want that to be spread around, then maybe stop buying our Congress. And it applies to all lobbies, but it also applies to AIPAC. And anyone who tells you otherwise isn't trying to protect Jewish Americans, they're trying to protect the government of Israel. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.